Welcome to Reframed, a podcast created to educate, encourage, and inspire parents and professionals. The Gladney Center for Adoption staff know parenting a child that has a history of loss, abuse, neglect, or trauma requires parenting skills and insight to be reframed in order to create a loving and caring environment. Reframed host Emily Morehead and guests strive to make an impact on our world through topics that are important to you, your family, and our communities. And now, here's your host, Emily Morehead.
Hi, and welcome back to Reframe. My name is Emily, and I'm sitting with my colleague and friend, Bill Porter. Today we're going to talk about brain development, and so I've asked him to join us on Reframe today. Bill, tell me about yourself.
I'm a father of two.
Okay.
My son Ben is 12 and my son Nate is 9. They're my biological children. I've been married about 15 years. I'm a licensed counselor in the state of Texas. And last year I celebrated 20 years of working with at-risk teens, working in detention centers, addiction centers. And so it's been a fun journey of learning a lot of different stuff as a counselor and just as someone who has always had a desire to help people. It's really been part of my story from the beginning of just realizing that I want to be a part of supporting people and helping them in their own journey. So
we call you one of Gladney's in-house brain development experts. It's kind of your topic of choice, and if people have questions, we kind of go to you for it. So when I hear counselor, I don't always hear like scientist with the brain development. So how did those two passions merge?
That's a great question. You know, I received my Master's of Counseling at UNT, and that was about 12 years ago. And it was incredible. I learned all about the different ways of providing empathetic responses and, learning more about the different diagnoses. It was really a great program. But the truth of the matter is, it didn't really talk about brain development and the connection between the brain and mental health, between the brain and just child development. And so I was lucky enough in 2011 to go to TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention with Dr. Purvis. And that was sort of the first introduction to the underpinnings of mental health, and the underpinnings of so much of that we see in the counseling world is really based in the brain. And so that sort of started my interest. And then the works of Dr. Bruce Perry, and just a lot of other research and conversations, just learning so much more about how much of who we are, how much of how we develop, so much of the way we interact with others is truly brain-based. I mean, even falling in love, if you think about it, you think, oh, I'm falling in love, my heart. Well, yeah, it's actually your brain. Like, your brain is falling in love with another brain. And so it just opened up my eyes to the way that humans connect, the way that they interact. And it really just, in some ways, blew my mind to understand what's actually happening. And so the last few years have been me learning more about it and understanding, taking away some of the mystery of how we connect, of how we manage our emotions, how neurotransmitters play a role in all of this, how there are multiple systems in the brain that interact in relationships, in understanding, and most importantly, obviously, is the application toward the clients we serve. And in our case, here at Gladney, we're talking about kids who maybe have gone through difficulties of trauma, abuse, and how it affects the development of the brain. And so for me, it's not just a theoretical idea, it's really understanding it, but then how do we really impact the lives of those people who are serving? And so it's been fascinating. I'll be honest with you, I'm just a lucky recipient of the people who have done research, the people who have shared so much. I just get to learn from it. And then obviously, personally, the way that I interact with my kids, the way that I interact with my wife, it all plays into a better understanding of the brain and how it works.
So you have two boys. So when you were, and my math is so bad, when you were in training for TBRI and started getting interested, was it at all this like mind-blowing experience in parenting, or was it just kind of like, oh yeah, this is something I should consider? What was it like?
I think anytime you learn something new, you go through a process of kind of breaking it down, defragmenting it, and then if you get to a point where you start realizing and start seeing truth as you are exposed to it, then it becomes more real. And so I think at first I thought, the conversations about fear, the conversations about how certain types of parenting can really um, be counterproductive to relationships. I think those things I understood, but it really has been a process for me of understanding some of the, I would call it, and I don't say it in a bad way, but some of the baggage, some of the neurobiology baggage that I carry as a person because of my childhood, that I now am carrying that into my parenting. And then as you expose that, and luckily, thank God it doesn't all happen at once, because it would be devastating to just have your whole, every approach that you have be exposed to everybody. But as it was exposed, as my children grew, as my wife honestly spoke to me about maybe ways I was engaging, and then as I continued to learn more and more, yeah, I mean, I would say today I'm an absolutely different parent, a different person because of my understanding of the brain. And I would say that everybody really, regardless of whether you're a parent or a teacher or a manager, understanding how brain systems works, I think is crucial in engagement with others. Without realizing that you can really be trying to trying to go in a direction, maybe get an outcome, but without realizing you could be working against the brain system. The activation of a fear response, the pushing people into a flight, fight, or freeze response, not understanding limbic system, not understanding how emotions work and how you have to allow emotions to have a place, the importance of emotional safety in relationships, the importance of validation. I mean, there's so many things that play into what most of us, to be honest with you, kind of have an idea of like, I think I understand this, I got what it takes to go through it. But then as it's revealed through the different trainings or different things, you realize, wow, there's so much more to this.
Yeah.
And to somehow think that I have even a corner on the market is insane. There's so much that we're learning about the interaction of our bodies and our neurology and how it impacts our behavior. We're really on the forefront of this. We're just touching the iceberg of something that's much, much bigger. So I'm excited about what the future is going to hold. Like I said, I got my master's in counseling just 10 years ago, and this wasn't even talked about. Yeah. And so this is just really exciting times to see the interplay of neurobiology and counseling and mental health, and then obviously parenting, which is where it all kind of hits, the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, I think sometimes as professionals, like, we know what we know, but when we bring it into our own home, it can be hard. And so I think a lot of our guests, are vulnerable, and I'm vulnerable, and I appreciate your vulnerability. And like, this is hard, and I slowly integrated it. I made mistakes along the way. We just don't know what we don't know. Absolutely. And so I think it's cool that there is all this awesome research coming out that's saying, here's what the brain is, here's how it can be shaped positively or negatively, and here's how you as parents can start that process from day one, or if you're adopting an older child, kind of recorrect the brain, which is so exciting and really powerful in adoption research. For the families that you and I serve, that's really exciting. I'm a mom, to an 18-month-old and then another one on the way. And so with those young early brains, talk to me about how they're formed and kind of give me the ideal world of what that looks like.
Sure. So one of the things that's really fascinating is that the brain is really set up from the time a child's born to connect. It's really, you can't understand the brain without it being in relationship to somebody else. For example, if I'm in a room by myself, my brain is functioning at a certain level, but you really can't understand the complexity of the brain until someone else comes in and interacts. And then that interaction, in a sense, sort of, is the process by which the brain works. And so children, when they're born, are just literally primed for this connection. And as a parent, a lot of times, we're completely unaware of this system of how we as parents are literally going to grow the brain. And I don't mean growing like theoretical, like it's physiological growth that's occurring, neurological growth that's occurring. And so our children come to us in the most desperate, needy, dependent state. And we as parents, especially new parents, so often are unequipped with what this really means. And so the first thing, obviously, that we think about when we have a child is we have to do physical care, right? You have the food, you have to change the diapers. I mean, all those things are crucial for a child to develop because you're helping them not have to interact with discomfort all the time. And so comfort is important, and physical, helping them, so most parents understand that. And unless the parent has a lot of mental health issues or maybe has a lot of abusive history, most parents do pretty well when it comes to physical care. The next one obviously is instrumental care, which is intellectual care, which is basically structures. It's kind of telling kids, okay, don't do this, don't do that. And we're all sort of primed with that.
Like don't run in the road.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We all have those sort of two parenting tools. But there's a third tool, and one which I, as a new parent, I promise you, I did not have, and that is just the emotional connection. I remember when my son was born, I was a real anxious father. I'm an anxious person in general, but I had anxiety over, is he hungry? Is he sleeping? Does he have poop? And so all I did was focus on hunger and poop, dirty diapers, and I just literally was like this man, like, is he hungry? Is Ben,
I mean, in the trenches, it's like, yeah, that's what you're worried about.
Absolutely. And I remember a situation where my father was in the living room with Ben, and he was dancing with him, and Ben's only a week old. And he's singing to him. And I remember this very clearly of me looking at him and being like, what are you doing? Why are you dancing with my son? And is he hungry and does he have poop? And that same week, I remember my mother-in-law taking Ben in and reading to him. She was in the nursery reading to him and rocking. And I remember looking in the room and thinking, why are you reading to Ben? He's a week old. He doesn't understand any of this. And just walking away like confused as to why would you do that? What I didn't realize was that they were doing exactly what Ben needed. They were they were engaging him on that level, and what they were doing without realizing it, and it's so funny, people have been doing this for centuries. This is nothing new. They were literally interacting with him on this social, emotional level. And as much as it was great for me to change a diaper and feed him, and I'm growing Ben's neurons in that process, they, in that dancing and interacting and playing with them and the physical touch and the physical massages, were literally exploding Ben's brain with physical growth.
That's so beautiful.
If you could look into his mind in those moments, you would see fireworks of neurological growth, of emotions, of interactions. When children are born, they have the ability to focus about 12 to 18 inches. And so they literally, all this input just grows their brain. And so every time you're holding a child, you are literally imprinting yourself into the mind of the child because of this interaction. One of the other things I learned through this process is the importance of repetition. There's this phrase that Dr. Purvis, the late Dr. Purvis, used to say, it's what's fires together, wires together.
I love that.
And so the idea is that with neurological growth, that repetition thickens the neurological pathways. So you have a situation where if a child gets repetition, what is a neurological country road, repetition thickens and thickens and thickens because that same stimulus is getting hit over and over and over again.
So I show up for you, I feed you, I read to you.
Absolutely. Then what happens is that country road thickens and thickens until you get into a neurological highway. And so if you think about the first few weeks of life, the first few months of life, how much interaction is a parent having with a child? It's all the time.
Nonstop.
And so, yeah, you know how it is. It's every 3 hours of feeding and, all the time, middle of the night. And so nature has set up the system where because the child is being so needy and the parents show up over and over and over again, what they're literally doing is they're writing themselves into the child's brain.
That's so cool.
So that now there's a neurological place in a child's brain that has you as a parent, has your fingerprints, your face, your touch, your smell all over it. And that basically is the foundation for attachment.
That's so sweet.
That says that because I've shown up over and over and over again, that I literally and met your needs over and over and over again, which is the serve and return process. The child serves out a need, the parent returns it. The child serves out a need, the parent returns it. How many times is that happening? That I literally am writing myself into my child's neurology.
That's really
It's
cool.
fascinating.
Yes.
This is stuff that I didn't understand.
Sure.
And what's really powerful about it, and one of the things that I think is, and I'm going to say something a little controversial here, I grew up with the baby boomers who were, the parents, and there was a lot of economic growth. And so we had this whole phrase of there's quality time versus quantity time. Quality time meaning that's what's really important. We need to have these great experiences. And quantity, well, we can't really do that because we have to work and I got to travel. And that was my experience of growing up. Well, the reality is that's not neurologically based. Because what neurology says is quantity, repetition, consistency is what grows the brain. So if you're somebody who is never with your child and you're not meeting your child's needs, the ability for them to build attachment to you, it's really not scientifically based, so you're going to be able to do that. And if you come in and do these sweeping big, let's say you go to Disney World and you're creating these sort of big quality events, well, yeah, you create memories, but technically you're not creating attachment. Attachment is showing up.
Sure.
That when my child has a need and I show up to meet that need, whether it's fear or hunger or emotional challenges, when I show up to meet that need and I meet that need over and over and over again, that child has a special attachment to me because I've showed up.
Sure.
So even though you're a better looking person than I am and you have, a nicer, way of you, because I've showed up with my child, when my child's scared, when my child's in need, my child will look at you and say, wow, that's a nice looking lady, but that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't have a special neurological connection to that person. And then they look at me and, I'm overweight and bald and whatever. But because I've shown up over and over and over again, that child comes to me and says, help me manage this world. Help me manage my emotions. And I, as a parent now, get to be that person.
Sure.
I mean, think about how many of us didn't understand that when we had kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Of the massive role that we play in the neurological development of our children. Yeah. The neurology that will help them with relationships later on in life, the neurology that will help them with their marriage, the neurology that will help them with their job, the complexity of the world. I mean, we literally are either setting the stage or disrupting the process of the neurological development.
Well, and you and I both know that not everyone gets that, I'm going to show up for you and I'm going to do it well. I mean, the kids that we're working with, they don't have that history of, I'm going to show up for you, I'm your person, I'm safe. When I meet your need, it's safe, it's comfortable, it's not painful. Sure. So what happens if that doesn't happen for them?
Well, there's a little bit of the brain systems that you kind of have to understand to sort of answer that question. Okay. And a lot of it involves the limbic system, which is a part of the brain that sort of sits in there that involves the emotion. Okay. And so with kids who are being well cared for and are in a safe environment, a lot of time the limbic system, which is the emotional, am I safe, am I not, is really at rest. Sure. And so when the limbic system is at rest, it's what they call it's resting and digesting, that's sort of the status of the brain, then the frontal cortex, which is the smarter part of your brain, comes online and children are able to learn and engage and are curious and are able to go and
Isn't
learn
that like
new
your
things.
Impulse control and like all the things that teenagers struggle with?
Yeah, the frontal cortex. Yeah. It doesn't go online until you're about 25. Okay. It's kind of when it all comes together. Okay. So those kids who are in the ideal world where we're understanding the emotional needs of our kids and we're connecting with them and we're engaging them on multiple, not just physically and not just instructional, but also emotional, then the children have this ability to learn and engage and grow and sort of process new ideas, and it's what we want for our kids. But if you have a child who doesn't have that safety, who is growing up in a fear-based, maybe through abuse, and it doesn't even have to be even as severe as abuse. It could be just a situation where there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of yelling in the home. Then what happens is the child lives on sort of a high alert. And so the limbic system is always kind of being activated. And so they have a different sort of baseline where things can trigger them into a fear response. And so now what is happening is there's a hijacking of a system that's meant to protect a child, but now it's being activated over and over and over and over again. And that affects the whole neurological system. It increases hormones, it increases neurotransmitters, and basically the child lives in a state of fear. Okay. And now you're talking about other systems that go offline.
So I'm going to pause you. What does fear look like for that child? Is that just that they're scared, or is there other things associated?
Well, a lot of times we don't even recognize that our children are sort of living in this sort of fear-based reality. Okay. They may look like they're not afraid, but the truth of the matter is is if there's not a place for them to be able to express emotions, or some freedom for them to be disappointed, freedom for them to get angry. In some ways, emotions are interesting creatures, because when emotions, a lot of us, our emotions sort of pop up without even us asking them to.
Sure.
And so then we sort of have to figure out what we do with them. So a lot of emotional is just sort of recognizing it, you validate it, you give it a name, and then it sort of disappears. Where imagine if a child has an emotional response, something that's happening, a need that maybe they're afraid of something, a dog or something like that. And every time that emotion comes out, it's basically being denied or is not being validated. Well, then that child sort of lives in, okay, what can I really do? And so you get this sense where the child doesn't have the ability to express themselves because they're afraid that this may not be received well. And so neurologically what happens is the child may start to shut down.
Okay.
Or may start to act out.
Okay.
So it's fear-based, but the behaviors don't look fear-based. This isn't a child that's coming and saying, hey, I'm scared, can you help me? This is a child who is literally getting ready to fight.
Like losing their mind at target.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or they freeze and they're just non-responsive, or they're flighters and they're always sort of. So we misinterpret a lot of bad behaviors. What I call maladaptive behaviors really are products of potentially a fearful environment. And so once that happens and a child's in that state, then the frontal cortex isn't online. And now you've affected learning and rational processing, problem solving. I mean, you've really shut down a system that children need to survive. And so with the kids we work with, that's their experience.
So with that brain development, that child not having their needs met, they don't have that ideal world brain. What does that mean for our families who are adopting kiddos later in life, who may have had really hard experiences in early brain development?
Yeah, one of the coolest things that occurs with the brain is that it's always rewiring itself. Even this conversation right now is rewiring our own brains. It's fascinating. And so the idea is called neuroplasticity, that the neurons that are being triggered are basically growing, and the ones that are being left behind are basically being pruned. And so input, basically, what the child receives, what type of sensory input and emotional support and all that stuff really determines the growth of the brain. And so with our families that are adopting, there's a lot of hope, because new information, new parents. I mean, think about adoption. It brings a whole new family, a new set of interactions, new doctors, new teachers. I mean, so many protective factors. And as those interactions occur, then the brain begins to rewire itself. It begins to take in that new information. And even though maybe it was fear-based, then creating a safe environment begins to lower the neurotransmitters, begins to drop the hormones, cortisol starts to drop. And then next thing you know, the child sort of comes back to getting online, and frontal cortex picks up, and then language kicks in, and learning, and all these amazing things that we love about children come back online. And so the amazing thing is we see this every day with families who are adopting kids from hard places, or kids who have gone through some neurological challenges. It regrows. And the mental health community is just learning this, but the medical community has known about this for a long time.
Sure.
For like example, a stroke victim, neuroplasticity, they have to sort of recreate pathways. So we're sort of borrowing from their experience and saying this not only applies to the way we move our arms or the way we remember things, it also applies to the way we interact with others.
And there's not an age limit on that, which is really cool.
No, there really isn't. I mean, there's sort of some, obviously 3 and under sort of is a thing, and then 8 and under and 15 and under. But yeah, I mean, your brain doesn't stop growing until you're 25. So when your 18-year-old is doing something real stupid, don't feel bad. They're not done. There's still growth.
Deep breath, parents and
18
teens.
is a legal age. It has nothing to do with brain chemistry. 25 is sort of the age where things come online. And I think most of us who got to 25 is kind of when there's a reason insurance knows that 25 is something, because before that, your brain is still developing. So
what's been your biggest takeaway with your journey, I mean, personally and professionally?
I think one of the things that has just changed the way I view everything is when I think about like what's the best brain, like what's the healthiest brain. Prior to learning all these things, I probably would have said IQ, intelligence, maybe someone who has a great memory, someone who has the ability to understand structure, systems. Like that's the best brain, like that's the one. And what I'm learning through all this research and just is to sort of redefine that really the healthiest brain is the one that seeks connection with others. Wow. I mean, we have a social brain, and we are better suited when we are in connection with others. I'm in a better place when I have somebody else who's with me. Isolation is terrible for our brain. Yeah. It is terrible. It creates depression, anxiety. It can create mental health issues, addiction. Our brain in isolation, when our brain is not in this community, sort of this social interaction, the reality is we're not in a healthy place. And so that gives a lot of hope for all of us who aren't the most intelligent people, that really what is the healthiest thing for me is to be in connection with the person, to be in connection with those. It's really the way that I was designed, to be in that interaction. Let me tell you a quick story, a fascinating story. My grandfather was a missionary. His name was Bill Porter, the same name as me. Him and my grandma Juanita were missionaries for many years, and about 10 years ago he passed away. And he died from pneumonia. It was a very, peaceful death, and there was nothing too traumatic about it. But obviously my grandmother, was now a widow and was basically going to have to live her life. And so we had a lot of interactions for the next couple of years. We'd go and visit my grandma, and it was great. And all of a sudden we noticed that my grandma was on the phone a lot with this man. And so she basically had a boyfriend.
Cute.
And so my dad called me and said, Bill, to confirm your grandma, who's 85, who looks 85, I mean, this isn't, has a boyfriend. And we're like, okay, this is interesting. And they're going to get married next month. And we were just amazed. And we're like, okay, we weren't planning on that. I wasn't expecting. So we meet Ralph. Ralph is basically, they were friends, and his wife died from cancer. And then obviously my grandfather died from pneumonia, and so they'd known each other for many years. And then after their spouses died, Ralph and Juanita started hanging out and built a relationship and decided to get married. So we go to the wedding, and what I didn't realize is I knew part of Ralph's family. I actually knew his grandson, Michael. Michael was in a youth group that I was kind of a youth leader in a youth group. So Michael's younger than me, but I remember him. He was a soccer player. He was a great kid. I remember him running around all the time. So I'm interacting with him, and I'm saying, hey, man, that's great, Michael. It's great that our grandparents are getting married. A little weird, so but cute. That's great. And he's like, no, I'm so grateful for Juanita. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. I'm grateful for Ralph, too. It's wonderful. And he's like, no, you don't understand. And I'm like, okay. So I paused, right? I'm like, something's going on here. And I said, what are you talking about? Like, what's the deal? He said, Juanita saved Ralph's life. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, when my grandmother died from cancer, Ralph went into some deep depression. And basically his health started failing. He started having more issues. He started withdrawing. He started isolating. And basically we believed that Ralph would have died within 6 months. We basically thought that this was probably the end of his life. But then he met your grandmother. And somehow, because of your grandmother, my grandfather came back to life. Wow. That he literally started engaging differently and connecting, and he came out of that sort of depression and had humor again and fun, and enjoying this process. And so, it sounds simple, right? Oh, some people getting married. But what was actually happening was that Ralph had gone into an isolation, and it ultimately probably would have taken his life. But because of my grandmother coming in and building that relationship, it changed everything. Wow. So what's crazy about that story is that was 8 years ago. And Ralph and Juanita are still doing great.
Still kicking.
Oh man, he's one of the nicest fellas. I mean, he's engaged, he's fun, he's got great humor. I mean, and it's not that this is an isolated story. This is the story of us, is that we all need it. You need connection, I need connection. And somehow this narrative has been lost or hasn't been shared enough of the reality of that we need each other. Yeah. And our children need us to show up, and our spouses are part of the equation, and our extended families. And really that's what my brain needs to grow and your brain needs to grow. And and I'm just a lucky recipient of all this stuff, just to be able to understand that and be able to change the way I view situations, the way I view people, the way I understand the value of connection. And what's so cool about all this is that science is confirming it. Yeah. It's just confirmed all the time. So These are exciting times. And I know we think of brain and we're like, whatever, I don't want to learn about that. But the truth of the matter is that just with understanding it more, it really can make deep impacts in the way you interact with others and the way that you understand yourself.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that today.
Sure.
Just personally and professionally walking us through that journey. So tell our viewers how they can get a hold of you.
Sure. So you can reach me at podcast@gladney.org.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd love to continue this conversation. It's something I really just am passionate about. And the truth of the matter is there's so much new information out there, and just sharing resources or books is just something that I think is really, really helpful.
Bill has provided a lot of resources for us today to continue the conversation in your home. So check out show notes and we'll have those resources available for you. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the reFRAMED podcast. Be sure to visit gladneyuniversity.org to access the show notes and discover upcoming trainings at Gladney University. We'd love your feedback, so please head to iTunes and rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time.